අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT මොබිටෙල් දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight, on First at 9 this Monday, the 20th of March 2023. Months-long efforts. The IMF Executive Board expected to approve Sri Lanka's bailout package today. Decision to be announced tomorrow at 8 a.m. Sri Lanka time. Equality. Sri Lanka committed to treating all its bilateral creditors equally, says Foreign Minister Ali Sabri. Inclement weather. Department of Meteorology expects more showers in several provinces. Early landslide warnings issued for 3 districts. Divestment. Cabinet grants approval for the divestment of stakes held by the Treasury Secretary in Sri Lanka Telecom PLC and Lanka Hospitals PLC.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Suzanne Shinali. From Studio 24 in Colombo.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරම.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දිනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබා ගත හැක.
Good evening, and this is First at 9. Now we start off tonight with Sri Lanka awaiting news from the International Monetary Fund, which is expected to approve the island nation's 17th IMF program, negotiated from around 10 months following the economic crisis last year. The decision reached by the IMF Executive Board is expected to be announced in a special media briefing that will be held by the IMF officials tomorrow at 8 a.m. Sri Lanka time. According to the State Minister of Finance, Ranjit Simbalapitia, Sri Lanka will be receiving $320 million as the first of the 8 tranches through which the IMF will be dispersing the $2.9 billion bailout within a 4-year for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is expecting results of its months-long efforts to secure an extended fund facility worth $2.9 billion from the International Monetary Fund to strengthen the country's foreign reserves that were badly affected by the economic crisis last year. The IMF Executive Board is expected to convene a meeting at the IMF headquarters in Washington today to approve the bailout package for Sri Lanka. If approved, this would be Sri Lanka's 17th program with the IMF. Further, the IMF will hold a media briefing to enhance their decision with regard to Sri Lanka's extended fund facility at 8 a.m. tomorrow Sri Lankan time. According to the IMF, the $2.9 billion bailout will be available through 8 tranches over a 4-year period.
මේ එකකතාවය ඇතිවීමෙන් පසුව වසර 4ක් තුල අටවතාවකට අපිට ඩොලර් බිලියන 2.9ක් නැත්නම් 3කට ආසන්න ප්‍රමාණයක් ලැබීමට නියමිතයි. එයින් පළවෙනි වාරිකය ඩොලර් මිලියන 320ක් විතර ප්‍රමාණයක් අපි ඉදිරි සතිය දෙක ඇතුළත ලැබෙවි කියන බලාපොරොත්තු.
Further, the Sri Lankan government said the IMF board's approval is also expected to unlock further funding through other multilateral institutions like the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Once the Executive Board approves Sri Lanka's IMF program, President Ranil Wickremesinghe said that the agreement reached will be tabled in the Parliament in his capacity as the Minister of Finance. While making a special statement in the Parliament on the 7th of March, President Wickremesinghe requested the House to accept it or provide an alternative. Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri says that Sri Lanka is willing to welcome investments into renewable energy sector to ensure energy security, adding that the government will not borrow loans in the future to finance sustainable projects. During an interview with the BBC, Foreign Minister Sabri also said that Sri Lanka is committed to treating all the bilateral creditors equally.
I understand Chinese point of view also, because they have lent a lot of money over a period of time. They have a perspective saying that in principle, they are not against the debt sustainability or discussion on that part, but what they are saying is, for that, everybody else should also take part. That means including the IMF, World Bank, IDB, like the multilateral. So that difference is opinion as to how the debt should be restructured. was probably the sticking point.
Do you believe now that China has come forward with this sort of an assurance, they are open to writing off some of the loans that Sri Lanka owes to Chinese banks?
I thought that's a little premature for us to discuss. So one thing that we are certain within our mind is that all the bilateral creditors will be treated equally. There will not be preferential treatment for any country. Basically, what we are encouraged by the fact that they said that immediately they are not pushing for a debt payment, but in the interim, they are willing to sit, negotiate and discuss. We have the will to pay, but we don't have the capacity to pay. So what we are now trying to do is get that capacity back. So that's going to be a very difficult and serious discussion.
China has proposed further investments in the Hambantota port in southern Sri Lanka. These are again loan-backed large-scale infrastructure projects that somewhere were the reason why Sri Lanka accumulated this sort of a debt pile. Is this a feasible way to go forward in the current circumstances, these type of projects?
Going forward, I don't think that we will take loans and build projects which are not sustainable, which don't have returns, which don't have a clear pathway for repayment. But we are looking at primarily is investment and probably on renewable energy, energy security as a regional hub, hospitality trade, which we have not fully realized given the potential what Sri Lanka has.
Some of the tougher measures and reforms you've taken, like the tax hikes or the cut in subsidies for fuel and electricity, more such measures are in store going forward to achieve your tough targets?
I think the worst is over. The most of the tough decisions we have already taken, some of them that you mentioned, tax hike. We cannot hike the tax anything more than that, but we can probably expand the tax net. The electricity and the fuel formula is there. So we'll continue with that formula. If the rupee strengthens, if the world price goes down, that benefit should be passed down to the ultimate customer and the consumer. So bad times are relatively over, but tough reforms are still there. And of course, SOE reforms and public sector reforms and digitalization are some of our priorities in order to attract investment.
Are we asking too much from the Sri Lankans to manage right now?
We have lived beyond our means. So therefore, whether we like it or not, these difficult measures which may be very unpopular need to be taken. Last year, Sri Lanka was one of the lowest revenue collector in the world in terms of GDP, just 8.3%. It's a difficult communication task, I understand that. But luckily, most of them, other than politically motivated unions and trade unions, have understood that.
Independent parliamentarian Professor G.L. Piri says the entire opposition will request the Supreme Court to enforce the writ order issued preventing the withholding of funds allocated to the local government election from the budget 2023 if the Treasury Secretary fails to release the necessary funds for the election within 7 days. He made these comments while addressing a media briefing today. Parliamentarian Udaya Ganmanpila meanwhile says the government's stance of refraining from printing money is baseless, adding that the central bank had printed 113 billion rupees worth of treasury bills alone on the 15th of March this year.
The Supreme Court made an interim order directing the Minister of Finance and the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance not to withhold the monies allocated by Parliament in the annual budget to the Elections Commission for the purpose of holding this election. That has not happened. That is the sole reason for the prevailing uncertainty. In that context, all the parties comprising the opposition in the Sri Lankan Parliament have made a collective decision to embark on a course of action. If within 7 days the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance does not comply with the order of the Supreme Court, the entire opposition in unison will approach the Supreme Court with a request that appropriate action be taken to enforce the interim order of the Supreme Court. In other words, to deal with the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance on the footing that he is guilty of contempt of court. He has deliberately disregarded an order given by the Supreme Court. He had not complied with it. And the failure of compliance on his part has entailed the very serious consequence that the suffrage of the Sri Lankan people has been infringed by the inability to hold these elections.
the best way of expressing people's anger against the government is at elections. Since there is no election, people are now agitated. In order to calm down the people, government is trying to deceive them by saying, don't worry about minor elections such as local authority elections. We are going to hold the presidential election, the grand election in November 2023. When the government postponed the local authority election on the basis that they don't have money to spend for the elections, we urge the government to print money, just 9 billion rupees, for financing the election. Then government's immediate response was that we can't print money like that because we have already signed a staff level agreement with the IMF. But according to central bank media release dated 15th March 2023, they have printed 113.5 billion rupees worth of treasury bills just in a day. It clearly shows that their argument that they can't print money for financing the election because of the staff level agreement they have signed with the IMF is a baseless lie.
Parliament of Samagi Janabalawege Iran Vikramaratne says that the government is now trying to create conflicts between the parliament and judiciary by influencing the judiciary in unwanted ways. Addressing a public gathering in Soisapura in Moratua, Vikramaratne said that they will continue their struggle to chase the government if they will harm the sovereignty of the people.
මේ ආණ්ඩුව කරන්න හදන්නේ අධිකරණයයි පාර්ලිමේන්තුවයි අතර ගැටණයක් ඇති කරන්න. පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ ඉන්න අපිට තියෙන වගකීම ඇවිල්ලා නීති හදන්න. නීති කොහොමද ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන්නේ කියන එක අපේ වගකීම නෙමෙයි. ඒක අධිකරණයේ වගකීම. අධිකරණයට තමයි තීරණය කරන්න පුළුවන් නීතියක් හරියට ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙනවද හරියට ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන්නේ නැද්ද කියන එක. මොකද්ද මේ කතාවෙන් කළේ? පාර්ලිමේන්තු වරප්‍රසාද නැති කරනවා කියන කතාවෙන් මොනවද කළේ? අධිකරණයට පීඩනයක් යොදවන්න ඒ ගරු විනිසුරුවරුව පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ගෙනල්ලා නිකන් හරියටම නිකන් බය කරන්න වගේ විනිසුරුවරු මේ රටේ අධිකරණයට අනවශ්‍ය ලෙස පීඩනයක් යොදවන්න එපා. අධිකරණය පාර්ලිමේන්තුවෙන් උයි විධායකයන් ස්වාධීනයි. ඒ අනුව අධිකරණය ක්‍රියාත්මක කරයි. ඔන්න ඕක තමයි මේ අය කරන්න හදන්නේ. අපි කියනවා ආණ්ඩුවට පවතින ව්‍යවස්ථාව තුල ආණ්ඩුව ක්‍රියා කළ යුතුයි. නැත්තම් මම මෙහෙම කියනවා අපි අරන් යන සටන අපි දිගින් දිගටම ගෙනියනවා. ගෙනියලා අපි මේ ආණ්ඩුව පළවා හරිනවා. මේ ආණ්ඩුව ජනතාවගේ ස්වෛරීත්වයට පහර ගැහුවොත් අපි ඒක කරනවාමයි.
3 fundamental rights petitions filed requesting the annulment of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's decision to pardon former MP Duminda Silva, who was convicted and sentenced to death over the murder of Bharata Lakshman Premachandra, was taken up for hearing once again today before the Supreme Court. The relevant petitions were filed by the wife and daughter of the late politician Sumana and Hirunika Premachandra and former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, Ghazali Hussain. Appearing on behalf of the Bar Association President's Council, K. Kanageshwaran stated that the former president's decision to pardon the defendant Duminda Silva is completely unlawful. However, President's Counsel Manohar De Silva, who appeared on behalf of ex-MP Duminda Silva, mentioned that the ex-president had followed the proper legal provisions in granting the presidential pardon to his client. The judge bench ordered the hearing of the petitions to be adjourned until March 30th. The Department of Meteorology warns of thunder showers to several parts of the island during the next 36 hours, particularly in the evening and night. Taking the situation into account, the National Building Research Organization issued early landslide warnings to areas in 3 districts. Many parts of the country have been experiencing heavy deluge since last afternoon, and the inclement weather led to incidents of flooding and landslide affecting the daily lives of the people in several areas. In one such incident, at least 5 people were injured in Bandaravela after heavy rains caused a landslip in the Kabaragala estate in Punagala area. According to the Disaster Management Centre, 3 houses were completely damaged while 20 were partially damaged, while over 200 people of 62 families in the area were affected. Meanwhile, a mound of earth collapsed near the second bend of the 18 hairpin bends of the Kandy Mahayangane road. Following the incident, the police took steps to close the stretch of the road temporarily for vehicular movement. The road stretch was reopened for traffic this morning. However, this evening, the Ministry of Highways announced that the 18 hairpin bend section of the Kandy Mahayangane road will be closed for vehicular movement from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily until further notice. Several other incidents of property damage owing to the inclement weather were reported from areas of Buttala, Kahavatta and Polonnaruwa. Meanwhile, in its weather forecast for the next 36 hours, the Met Department warned of thunder showers across many areas of the island, particularly during the evening and night. Heavy showers of above 75 milliliters are likely to some places in the western, Sabaragamuwa, central and Uba provinces and in the Galle Mathura districts. Spells are also expected in the coastal area of the western province and in the Galle and Mathura districts during the morning hours. The Met Department requested the general public to take necessary precautions to minimize damages caused by the strong winds and lightning during thunder showers. Taking the situation into account, the National Building Research Organisation meanwhile issued an early landslide warning for several areas in 3 districts.
Warning level 2 alert amber warning was issued to Haldamulla Division Secretary Division Badula District, LPT Division Secretary in Galle District. Warning level 1 watch yellow warning was issued to Nagoda and Baddegama Division Secretary Divisions in Galle District, Ukwela, Rattota, Vilgamu and Naula Division Secretary Division Mathura District.
Stay with us to find out the latest divestment move of the government with regard to 2 listed companies in the Colombo Stock Exchange.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන් කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ටීමෝ වෙතින්.
Welcome back. The Treasury Secretary informs the Board of Directors of Sri Lanka Telecom PLC and Lanka Hospitals PLC that Cabinet has granted approval in principle for the divestment of the stakes held by the Treasury Secretary in the 2 companies. The companies also announced that they have received the approval of the Cabinet of Ministers to sell the shares owned by the Sri Lankan government in Sri Lanka Telecom PLC and Lanka Hospital PLC, which are 2 companies listed in the Colombo Stock Exchange, as per the policy decision of the government. Notifying the Colombo Stock Exchange of this decision, Sri Lanka Telecom says that the divestment will be implemented in the near future by the state-owned enterprise restructuring unit established under the Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policy. The Ceylon Hospital PLC, meanwhile, has also issued an announcement stating the same. The Treasury holds a 49.50% stake of the issued shared capital of Sri Lanka Telecom PLC, while 51.34% stake of the share capital of Sri Lanka Hospital PLC is held by the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, representing the government of Sri Lanka. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka has requested the Attorney General to consider instituting criminal proceedings against 3 pyramid-type prohibited schemes operating in the country. Accordingly, the CBSL has carried out investigations to ascertain whether the entities Fast 3 Cycle International Private Limited Sport Chain App, Sports Chain ZS Society Sri Lanka and the OnMax DT have violated the provisions of the Banking Act. In relation to the examination conduct, the CBSL has determined that the 3 relevant entities and directors, founders and promoters of those entities have conducted prohibited schemes in contravention of the provisions of the said Act. Sri Lankan shares was higher for the 5th straight session today, helped by gains in financials and consumer staples stocks. The all share price index rose 0.31% to 9,699.96. The S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks ended at 2,851.65, following a 0.41% gain. The trading volume for the ASPI rose to 98.7 million shares from 55.7 million in the previous session. The market turnover rose to 1.8 billion rupees or $5.41 million from 1.25 billion rupees in the previous session. Capital goods, a top contributor to the market turnover, while food, beverage and tobacco sector was the second highest contributor. Foreign investors were net buyers in the equity market, purchasing stocks worth 227.1 million rupees, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading 1.73 billion rupees worth of shares. Now let's take a look at how the rupee has traded against the major currencies in the world. Welcome back. Now, over 250 female athletes from France arrived in Colombo today to take part in the 21st edition of the challenging Raid Amazons adventure event that will take place from the 20th to the 28th of March. During the trail, several events such as canoeing, trail running, bike and run, escape game and mountain biking will take place, covering several locations in Kandy, Ridhigama, Pinawala and Pahala Kadugannawa. The participants of the Adventure Trail Raid Amazons 2023 arrived at the Bandaranaike International Airport earlier today. Upon arrival, the group was warmly welcomed with a traditional flair by the officials of the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau and the Bandaranaike International Airport. The group boarded the Udarattamanike train from the Gampa railway station shortly thereafter for a scenic journey to Kandy, where the trail will unfold from the 22nd to 28th of March. Raid Amazons will hit the fabled streets of Kandy with the participation of over 250 female athletes from France. Raid Amazons is a coveted annual destination adventure event originated from France, which features female athletes competing their way through a range of challenges such as orienteering, mountain biking, canoeing, riding, running and archery. Raid Amazons is the world's only itinerant women's adventure race. The event is hosted for the 3rd consecutive year by the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority in collaboration with Sri Lankan Airlines and Connaissance de Ceylon, the official ground handling partner of the event. According to their 9-day agenda for the 21st edition of the trail, several events such as trail running, bike and run, escape game and mountain bike will take place, covering several locations in Kandy, Ridhigama, Pinawala and Pahala Kadugannawa. As such, the Raid Amazons team will participate in a trail running event from Hanthane to Galaha on the 22nd of March and in a canoeing event from Huluganga to Victoria Reservoir on the 23rd. The group will then take part in a bike and run event on the 24th from Ridhigama to Delvita. Subsequently, they will compete in an escape game in the town of Kandy on the 25th of March. Following the escape game, the athletes will engage in mountain biking and trail running activities on the 26th and the 27th respectively. The group is then expected to return to Paris on the 29th of March. The participants will also be able to connect with a potpourri of natural and historical highlights of Sri Lanka as they trek through the region. Raid Amazons will especially help to create more awareness and spread a positive message about Sri Lanka, encouraging more tourists to visit the country.
And that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9. We'll be back again tomorrow at the same time. Anuradha Wickramasinghe will join you next with World News. I'm Suzanne Shinali. Stay safe and have a good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.